Privileged to live in Ontario. Our province is justly famous for its iconic wildlife and vast forests. In this report, I asked two questions about our government. In Volume 1, does it respect the environmental rights of Ontarians? And in Volume 2, has it been doing a good job looking after our forests and wildlife? Let's start with Volume 2. Ontario's biodiversity is primarily the responsibility of the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. Among other things, that ministry is responsible for forest fire, invasive species, and native species in decline. In each case, the ministry has taken some positive steps in the last year, and that's why I've called this report Small Steps Forward. But real results will take more than small steps. Sustaining this huge landscape and its wildlife will take leadership, commitment, and resources. First, let's talk about fire. Ontario's northern forests evolved with fire. They need regular, moderate fires to be healthy and to support wildlife. But after 100 years of fire suppression, Ontario has an unnaturally mature forest, loaded with fuel and susceptible to devastating forest fires. Climate change, with its increased heat, drought, and severe weather, will increase the risk of catastrophic fires. The best tool that we have to prevent massive, destructive, out-of-control fires is controlled fire. The ministry knows this. They know that the boreal forest needs much more fire than we have had for safety and to maintain this globally significant ecosystem. They have a new policy that allows more fire. Now they actually need to put that policy into effect. They need to use controlled fire to bring our boreal forest back into balance. More fire is especially important in protected areas like parks, or we may lose the natural forests and wildlife that we're trying to protect. Second, invasive species. Invasive species are doing enormous and growing damage in southern and central Ontario, from Phragmites to the emerald ash borer to the devastating potential of Asian carp. I congratulate the government on its new Invasive Species Act, which comes into effect next week. But we need action, not just laws. Municipalities, conservation authorities, volunteer groups, they're doing their best. But they need provincial leadership, coordination, and support. And the most basic step of all, they need good province-wide monitoring. Third, there is the decline of native species. One of Ontario's most important species is the moose. Moose are key forest animals in most of Ontario. Moose hunting has great cultural and economic significance for both First Nations and other communities. And who could forget paddling around a corner to discover a bull moose shaking his antlers in the shallows? So it matters that moose are in rapid decline. Their Ontario population is down more than 20% just in the last 10 years. And it's continuing to drop. In half of Ontario's wildlife management areas, not enough newborn calves reach maturity just to replace the adults that die. Why is the population dropping so quickly? The loss of roadless areas, too much fire suppression, disease, parasites, hunting, they all make life difficult for moose. Climate change is making it worse. Moose are exquisitely adapted to cold weather and very poorly adapted for heat. In the face of all these challenges, what has the ministry done? They've made some small adjustments to moose hunting. No action at all to preserve their habitat. Hunting rules for calves are still too lax. Every single one of the 98,000 licensed moose hunters in Ontario is allowed to kill a calf every year. That's more than 3 times as many hunters as there are calves even born. And the ministry is trying to manage this entire important species with far too little information. Thus, all over Ontario, from north to south, we see threats to Ontario's biodiversity which are not being effectively managed by the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. The ministry is being penny-wise and pound-foolish. It can and should do a better job looking after our forests and wildlife. Now, I've got some better news in Volume 1. Volume 1 of my report looks at how the government respects the environmental rights of Ontarians. Here I'm proud to report that there's been impressive progress in the last year. For example, when I was appointed commissioner last fall, the Environmental Registry contained more than 1,800 outdated proposals for environmentally significant decisions going back to 1996. This was profoundly disrespectful of Ontarians, and in many cases denied them their legal right to challenge significant environmental decisions at the Environmental Review Tribunal. So last fall, I visited each of the key deputy ministers, and I brought with me a list of their ministry's non-compliance with the Environmental Bill of Rights. And I asked each of them, would you like an opportunity to fix this before we mark you for your report card? And they all said, yes, please. And since then, they have worked hard. Government ministries have worked very hard to improve their compliance with the Environmental Bill of Rights. More than 1,000 of the outdated proposals were fixed by March 31st. And more are catching up every month. Ministries are posting better quality notices. More ministries are voluntarily using the Environmental Registry to consult the public, such as a recent proposal for amendments to the Building Code. Treasury Board Secretariat and several new laws have come under the Environmental Bill of Rights umbrella. And I'm delighted to announce that on Friday, the Ministry of Education agreed that they will become subject to applications for review, which will allow members of the public to suggest better environmental laws and policies in education. Now, the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change had the most to fix, but they've also put the most effort into making up for it. For the first time, the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change now posts regular updates for the public on their outstanding applications for review. They've made significant progress on their applications for review this year. They have committed to modernize the Environmental Registry. The software for that registry is still written, believe it or not, in DOS. And they've launched a long overdue consultation on amendments to the Environmental Bill of Rights itself. Until November 8th, everyone in Ontario who wants stronger environmental rights has a rare and long overdue opportunity to ask for them. As guardian of the Environmental Bill of Rights, it's exciting and satisfying to see so much improvement in such a short time, and with more to come. And as we wrap up this year's report, and I want to thank the members of my office, my team who are here somewhere at the back, Chris and Michelle and Rebecca and others who've worked extremely hard to put this together. Our office is already working on next year's report. As part of my commitment to a more open and collaborative relationship with Ontarians, we are now inviting suggestions for possible topics for next year's Environmental Protection Report. Anyone's interested is welcome to submit a recommendation. The instructions are on our website, which is eco.on.ca. Merci à tous et à toutes. I'll be glad to take questions.
I noticed in your report on invasive species, one of the ones you mentioned was wild feral pigs, and I'm wondering how big of a problem that is in Ontario, and if it is, where it is a problem.
They are in southern Ontario. They can be an enormous problem. In the United States, they cause billions of dollars of damage every year. I know that there's a picture of them on page 47, and it does indicate that in the United Counties of Prescott and Russell, the Ministry of Natural Resources has given hunters licenses to kill feral pigs, which sounds like a really good solution.
Can you talk a little bit about what's going on with bat populations, and in particular the one that you said may be wiped out because of this white nose syndrome?
Yes, the bats are, it really is a terrible tragedy. I frankly had I knew bats were important, but before I became commissioner, I never realized how important. According to one study that we've seen in the U.S., the decline of bats is already costing agriculture more than $3 billion a year. We have 8 species of bats in Ontario. 5 of them hibernate in caves. Of the 5, 4 are already now on the endangered list. Millions and millions of bats have died from white nose syndrome, and it only arrived in North America in 2006. That's 10 years ago. So in 10 years, we've had this catastrophic decline. People probably brought the disease from Europe. People probably transmit it from one cave to another. One of the things the Ministry of Natural Resources has done is to try to increase people's awareness that they shouldn't go into caves where bats are, and certainly they shouldn't go from one to another without absolutely sterilizing everything they're wearing. I mean, what a tragedy to be the person who has carried that disease into a cave that wasn't previously infected. Now, there is some urgent research going on, mostly in the United States, and I saw a report yesterday that there's, for the first time, a suggestion that there might be a successful treatment for some bats. I mean, we need these bats. They are the primary predators of huge numbers of insects, and at the very same time that the Chief Medical Officer of Health is warning us about being bitten by mosquitoes because of the increasing risk of disease, one of the primary predators of mosquitoes is disappearing. It's a very serious problem.
Commissioner, you also recommend that, and you spoke a little bit about letting forest fires burn themselves out, or just not fighting them as aggressively, I guess. When should the ministry make the decisions? When do you make the decision when to fight a fire and when not? I mean, obviously, if it's near populations, they're going to have to fight, but
right.
If it's remote, you mentioned, valuable stands of timber that could be harvested, maybe have to sacrifice. But how can they make those decisions?
Well, the ministry has a strategy which sets out criteria they can take into account. But you're absolutely right. The first thing is you want to protect human life. And the second thing is to protect property and other values as possible. But at the same time, we have to remember that ultimately we can't choose between fire and no fire. We've had 100 years of trying to do that. And now it's put us in a terrible pickle. What we're choosing between is uncontrolled, devastating fire or controlled fire. And the ministry does know how to do this. And they need to have the courage to actually use it. Sometimes that means that timber that might otherwise have been harvested 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now has to be allowed to burn for the greater good. Now, if there is timber that's ready for harvest and there's a market for it, by all means log it first. I'd love to see far more wood being used in Ontario buildings. One of the things that we've seen is Ontario, we're very proud of the fact that we just now started allowing 6-story wood buildings. Well, Quebec allows 12-story wood buildings, and Europe's looking at even more. And you significantly reduce the carbon footprint of a building when it's made out of wood. There's a lot of good reasons to increase our use of wood in Ontario construction, and that would also help a bit. Log first, then burn.
Commissaire, dans votre rapport, vous dites que le gouvernement a tous les outils nécessaires pour protéger la biodiversité et l'environnement, mais qu'il ne les utilise pas toujours.
Oui.
Qu'est-ce que vous voulez dire par là?
Oh oui, il y en a beaucoup d'exemples ici. Mais, OK, le plus facile, c'est la question des appâts pour le poissonnage. Excuse-moi si j'ai fait les erreurs. 2014, le gouvernement a proposé qu'est-ce qu'ils vont faire avec les appâts. Mais après ça, il n'a fait absolument rien. Nous savons déjà que les appâts vivants dans les parcs protégés protègent souvent les espèces envahissantes au parc protégé. C'est très dangereux, c'est très facile de corriger. Le gouvernement n'a fait rien.
Au niveau du Nord, vous parliez tantôt de la forêt, de la problématique au niveau de la forêt dans le Nord. Quels sont les problèmes là-bas?
Le problème le plus important, c'est le feu, le manque de feu. Et le deuxième, c'est la chute des orignaux. Et c'est ça que nous avons discuté un peu. C'est surtout une question d'une meilleure étude sur les protections des habitats. Le ministère des Ressources naturelles et forêts dépense à peu près 60 millions de dollars chaque année pour construire les routes dans les forêts. Et on sait que chaque fois qu'on construit une route dans une telle région, les orignaux déclinent. Mais tout de même, c'est ça qu'on continue à faire.
Le gouvernement ne fait pas assez. Le gouvernement devrait être plus sensibilisé.
Oh oui, absolument. Et la première chose qu'ils doivent faire, c'est de prendre les informations bien réelles. Et maintenant, d'habitude, ils travaillent à tâtons.
You know that the public didn't receive notice when sewage was dumped into Toronto's harbor this summer. On what scale was that sewage dump? Was it was it somewhere approaching what had happened in Montreal, where there was a lot of debate about that the sewage dump that happened in that city?
Well, the sewage dump in Montreal was due to construction, so it continued for weeks, and therefore was very much larger, and it was, I think, most of the entire system. The spill that we had on August 11th was not nearly as big as that, and it wasn't as big as the one as we had in 2013. But still, if you went down to the harbor, you could see floating, condoms and sewage and garbage and feces and all sorts of things that you wouldn't want your children swimming in. So Toronto has spent a great deal of money building tanks to contain stormwater and to improve its capacity to survive bad weather. But as the weather gets worse and as the paved areas around Toronto get larger, we have more and more flows to cope with. So it would be better to stop the overflows. But until we can stop the overflows, at least people ought to know that's not a good day to take your kid to the beach. I mean, that particular Sunday, I had my grandson. And if I hadn't known better because of my work, I might have taken him to the beach.
I wonder if you could speak briefly to the Algonquin wolves. Algonquin wolves?
Yes.
The environmental groups have been speaking about changes to their protected territory and decreases in it. Is that something your office has looked at?
I haven't looked at it in any detail. I'm certainly aware that the Ministry of Natural Resources has rules that if a wolf is on one side of a boundary, they're protected, but if they're on the other side of the boundary, they're not, and they haven't told me how they've explained this to the wolves. They've also not taken adequate measures, so if people say, well, they're confused, they didn't know for sure whether it's a wolf, well, then it's okay. We're not going to have effective protection of the wolf population when we treat them like that.
Given that some of these problems are being made worse by climate change that you pointed out here, and the province is going to have this new stream of revenue coming in with cap and trade, should it be funding some programs to mitigate these issues using that cap and trade money?
Well, I'm going to talk about cap and trade in my next report, so stay tuned. Next month, we've got a report on cap and trade. Please come back then.
What would you like to see happen to help the moose population in particular?
Well, we've recommended that one of the first things the ministry has to do is a very serious examination about the impact of loss of habitat. A better fire policy would also help. Moose depend on and thrive in an area where you have a natural mosaic of different shaped and size areas of different ages and species of trees. When I was in Pekanjikam in February, the elders were telling me that was one of the reasons that they traditionally had burned the forest, is precisely to improve the habitat for moose. In an area that hasn't burned, you don't get as many moose. So a better fire policy would help with moose. But we also think that the ministry needs to do a better job communicating with First Nations because it is a shared resource between the First Nations and the ministry. We think that they should be paying more attention to poaching, and they should absolutely have a better system of collecting data. Right now they rely on volunteers and a partial survey to guess at what's actually happening with the moose, which means that they don't know in individual areas is calf survival improving or not. So they're trying to make policy without enough information. All done?
The last one is not in your report, but we've been reporting a lot this fall on bottled water and bottled water operations. And I know your
Yes.
predecessor certainly had some comments on that. I'm wondering as well if you have concerns and are encouraged by the fact that government's put in a 2-year moratorium on new and expanded bottled water operations.
Well, I think the moratorium is an excellent idea. It gives the government some time to figure out what its rules are going to be. But we still have the situation where the 3 problems that my office reported on remain. The first is that we give away 100,000 liters of water for 37 cents. For those very few people for whom we charge anything. Most water users in Ontario pay nothing. We don't have enough information to know. It's the same sort of problem as I mentioned with the moose. We're making decisions with our eyes closed. We don't have enough information to know what's happening with groundwater in Ontario. We know that climate change is going to increase water stress, and we don't have enough information, and yet we're allowing, I forget how many millions of liters to be taken every day out of the ground. And we don't give the public enough information. So this is one of the areas where the Ministry of the Environment dramatically needs to improve their compliance with the Environmental Bill of Rights. 3/4 of water taking permits, the public gets no notice at all, including a large number of high-risk permits. And of the ones where they do give notice, they don't attach enough information, so the public cannot make sensible decisions and sensible comments. So if we keep the public's eyes closed, we've got the government's eyes closed, and we're giving away vast amounts of money and not even recovering enough to cover the cost of issuing the permits. It's not a good system. All right, well, thank you very, very much for coming and for your attention. Merci à tous et à toutes, and I hope my French was okay.